Hello. We're going to be looking at definition. When I first began introducing human design, definition was the very bedrock of what I tried to explain to people. It really was a way of beginning to introduce what it means to be imprinted, what it means to be fixed, and what it means to have a place within you that you can trust. And I can remember my very first descriptions of definition. I talked about what was reliable and what was consistent throughout your life. Every moment, every breath, every day, every month, every year, it's always there. I mean, after all, when you look at your Bodygraph, and if there is definition for the vast majority of humanity, there is definition in their design, then you can see very clearly just the obvious, that you have a consistent way, a fixed way, a permanent way in which information moves within you. That's always reliable, and always reliable because it's you. I mean, it is the part of you that is designed to operate consistently, and thus it is the only part of you that truly you can trust. That you can trust, and not so much to be right or wrong, but you can trust to be you. To be you. In the various designs of forms that I have taught over the years, if you look at the design of the inanimate with its single gate, and only its single gate, and you look at the design of the cell, and you see its one potential of defined channel, you see the movement from the inanimate to the animate. And for me, it is a very clear metaphor of what definition is really all about. That definition in the meaning of what we could call metaphorically two inanimates, one at either end of a channel, that the moment that there is this activation at either end, there is this life force that emerges. It is the definition. It is the fixing, and it brings from either end something new. So often when newcomers come to design and they begin to investigate the names of gates and channels, when they're looking at channels, they try to add together gate 1 and gate 2, but that's not really the way that it works, or gate A and gate B. That is, the channel in and of itself, definition in and of itself, is much more than the sum of its parts. It is very much a living force. And throughout this week, what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at the different kinds of definition configurations. One of the suggestions I would make to you is take a look at the Human Design Global Survey. You can find that in the Human Design Resource Center or at www.jovianarchive.com. And you will see that if you scroll down through the survey, you'll get to a place where there is a graphic and numerical statistical resource on the different kinds of definition. That a single definition and split definition, that is the simple split definition, two parts that are activated but are not connected to each other, that these two kinds of definition represent about 85% of the human population. And then we have the triple split definition, which is approximately 10%, and then the very rare, extremely rare in percentages, the extremely rare quadruple split definition. So throughout this week, we're going to take a look at these various kinds of definition, and I will give you some overviews as to their nature. But remember, what's so important about definition is that this very life force that is consistent and reliable, this is the counterpoint to everything that is open in you, that is open to conditioning, that is open to the transformation of you away from your true self and your true authority to the power of the not self and the mind. And definition leads us directly to what makes human design so valuable to humanity. That is, definition leads us to type, and through type to strategy, and through strategy to authority. Follow your strategy. Honor your inner authority. Trust what's really you. Single definition occurs in about 40% of the human population. Single definition is simply to be understood as a continuous connected definition. It can be through many centers and in many ways, as long as there is a continuous connection between all of those centers. And single definition can be a very simple single definition. Somebody like the late John F. Kennedy, whose only definition was the channel 4037, the channel of community. This is a simple single definition. Or you can have very complex single definitions, like my own. In that case, I'm somebody that has 5 centers interconnected through a single definition. What single definition really represents is that it's self-contained. In other words, there is not a basic divide wherein 60% of the population has, divisions within their own design that requires them in one way or another to find bridges, to find that wholeness or flow of the information that is within them. With a single definition, there is always access to, within that definition, those aspects that are going to be able to guide the life correctly. In many ways, for somebody who is a single definition, who enters into their experiment in human design, it often can feel much easier for them simply that they can integrate the information through their whole system immediately. With single definition, you have this very clear counterpoint between the single definition and between the openness. What basically is human design's way of looking at nature and nurture, that what is fixed in you is reliable and trustworthy, and what is open in you is subject to conditioning by others, and one has to be aware of that. With single definition, there is less of an impact by the other. Now, what I mean by that is that when you are a split definition and you're a single definition and you have open centers that get conditioned, obviously that level of conditioning can be impactful. And obviously, depending on the nature of one's psyche and the way in which one approaches life, that in fact that conditioning can be overwhelming and the not-self will rule. However, the basic need of a split definition to find bridges actually brings to those areas where the bridges are potentials a much greater vulnerability to the power of influence from others. And so in many ways, the single definition is less controlled in their relationships by the other. Yes, they still have to deal with the same conditioning forces, and in fact, as is the case for most of humanity, they remain very much not-self because of the overwhelming power of the not-self mind. Remember, the way in which our world operates, the way in which our Maya operates, is that, it is all programmed from the mental plane. And that everyone is conditioned from the time that they come into the world, that it is up to them in terms of the way in which they think. It's up to them to figure out mentally for themselves what to do and what not to do in this life. And obviously what we know through human design is that this truly is not the case, not just human design. So much wisdom that has been offered in the world over millennia has pointed out quite clearly that the mind is something that can be appreciated, but it's not something that truly rules what is correct for us. In single definition, it is easier in that sense to tap into the reliable fixed source. Imagine what that's like as a split definition where, upper definition is separated from lower definition. There are going to be aspects in the definition that are going to dominate. In many cases, for example, split definitions rarely recognize that they actually have a split because they're so overbalanced to one area of the split. Single definition does not have that dilemma, and in fact, by nature, are really better equipped to deal with the way in which the whole influencing comes from the conditioning field. But whether you're this or that in human design, there really is no better or easier. It still comes back to the very same thing. It comes back to whether you can follow your true strategy and your inner authority to lead you to the decision making that's going to be correct. It doesn't matter what the configuration is. It is the correctness of action and decision making that makes the difference. According to the Human Design Global Survey, almost half of all of humanity is a split definition. About 45%, according to the statistics as they stand now. That's a huge chunk of humanity, and it says so much about human nature. When we're dealing with a split definition, understand first of all what that really is. That is, you have two areas within your design that are linked, that are defined, centers that are defined to each other. But you have areas of definition that are not connected to each other. They're cut off from each other. And in the case of a split definition, this is when you have two areas that are defined, but they are split from each other. This is a simple or a split definition. And obviously it says something very straightforward right from the beginning. It says that these are human beings that really have two parts to them, and two parts to them that are not always connected to each other. And one of the things about the nature of the split definition, because it is a basic binary, there is a tremendous pull to find a bridge to link that binary together and to find wholeness. Now, a bridge is a term that we use in human design to describe any gate or channel that will form a connection for a split definition. And if you are a split definition throughout your life, you have been in your geometry meeting those forces that can bridge your split. And how difficult it is to judge the relative value of one person bringing a bridge and another without really being able to operate correctly as yourself. Otherwise, the conditioning forces of that bridge are much more powerful, even more powerful than an open center and its impact on not-self strategies. When you have a split definition, and the split definition can be bridged by a single gate activation, this may be in one place, this may be in several places, then it's very important to understand the psychology within the split. The psychology is that that gate that they don't have, they see as their own problem in life. In other words, this is something that throughout their life will become the thing that they're most focused on finding. It will be the deepest conditioning force in their life, more powerful, again, than any of those open centers. That single gate will become their holy grail. You know, it's like having a definition from the spleen to the root, and you have a definition from the ajna to the throat. And you have the 48th gate, which is the gate of depth, but you don't have the 16th gate, the gate of skills. That single gate activation will bring together that wholeness, will lead to the ability of transforming the projected spleen to the root and give it energy and allow that energy to flow to the throat center. In other words, that very single activation will create the illusion of definition, and in this case, this example's case, manifesting. And it means that being's going to spend their whole life thinking that they don't have enough skills, that it's their problem, that they've never learnt enough skills, that they haven't stayed long enough with skills, and they're going to spend their whole life looking to develop skills themselves, when in fact that's not what it's all about for them at all. But if you're a split definition and only one gate is required to join that split, then this is the conditioning. The conditioning is that's something that's wrong with you, that you have to fix, that you have to have. Remember, if you're operating correctly as yourself, then you're going to be able to take advantage of conditioning. You're not going to be a victim of it. Now, if you're a simple split definition, but the bridge that's required is a channel or more, in other words, that your splits are quite a distance apart from each other, then the psychology is different. No longer is it seen that this is something that's your problem, but now it becomes this is something that is their problem. and that you begin to be uncomfortable with people because the extent of the bridging necessary brings too much of their conditioning into what provides you with wholeness. Something important to keep in mind about being a split definition. As a simple split, human beings are absolutely essential for you. The other is so essential for you in your life. And yet the other can only be correct when you enter into your relationship with the other correctly, as yourself. And a little piece of advice. So important for split definitions to spend time in public places. In public places, where you can take advantage of the public aura to hook up your split, without that being direct conditioning or direct influence on you. About 1 out of every 10 people is a triple split. That means that there are hundreds of millions of triple split definitions in the world. And they are very, very different from the split definition. Because when we're dealing with this triple split, there is not this tension, this very focused tension that is created between the separated binary that you have in a simple split. That the moment that you bring in this third aspect of definition, and remember a triple split definition is somebody within their design that's going to have 3 areas that are defined, in other words a minimum of 6 centers defined, but they are not connected to each other. And in this triple split configuration, because you no longer have this focus on the binary, you also have something else. You have patterns of connection, and that you have patterns of connection that are never really simple. In other words, the 3 aspects can be connected or not connected in different ways. That there are certain relationships in which only certain aspects of the triple split, for example, 2 aspects of the split may be joined in a connection with the other, but a third aspect is left hanging and outside of the connection. There's a very different relationship with the other. The split definition is deeply connected to the other, and that the other represents a deep importance in their life. But the moment that we're dealing with the triple split, the other does not carry the same power. It is much more difficult in that sense for the other to bring to the triple split an actual sense of wholeness. There are simply so many ways in which they can operate. It's one of the things to see about the triple split is that there is an essence of being driven that so many analysts see in the triple split, and yet clearly to recognize that it's simply the way in which they move through the other in their life as opposed to the split definition. They don't have the same attachment. They don't hang on in the same way. The bridging that can take place by others for the triple split, that bridging doesn't have the same potency. And yet what that leads to as a psychology for the triple split is so often this sense of things moving slowly, things not appearing to crystallize fast enough for them. And there is this movement in them towards this place of crystallization. One of the things that is really important for the triple split is to begin to recognize that for them, the other is much more an environment or a milieu or a group or a tribe or a club or the office or whatever it may be. In other words, there is a very different focus. The focus isn't on the individual as the answer. There is no one being in that sense that truly will satisfy the triple split, will give them fully that sense of wholeness. The illusion that the split definition can get from a simple bridge by the other is so different. So here in dealing with the triple split, one of the ways in which they can be more comfortable in their process is to see clearly that their relationship is really with a community. And through that community, their ability to move through those various aspects of their split and to feel healthy in the way in which those aspects operate. Because they operate differently, and they operate at different times. You know, everything about human design is its mechanics. And the moment that you get into the complexities of triple split definition, you come to the realization that there is only one thing that truly protects them, and that is their ability to be able to operate correctly as themselves. And of course, the difficulty so often for triple split definitions, or for any split for that matter, is that their very type itself and the way their strategy works can be split. An emotional being who is cut off from their sacral, who is a generator, and that the strategy is for the generator to respond, but that is split off from the emotional system, and the emotional system is the authority. It is only through the understanding of mechanics, and it's only through the recognition that to operate correctly means that you follow both your strategy and your authority, that only then is the triple split going to be able to operate in the world in a healthy way. Of all the statistics that have been gleaned so far from the Human Design Global Survey, I think the most surprising is how rare the quadruple split is. When you look at reflectors, there, for approximately every 100 people, there's one reflector. But when we look at the quadruple split, for approximately every 200 people, one of them will be a quad. And obviously, when we're dealing with a quadruple split definition, we are dealing with somebody who is extremely defined, despite the fact that they are splits. You know, at the simplest level, to have 4 definitions separated from each other means that there are 8 centers of the 9 defined. And in many cases with quads, all 9 centers are defined. In a sense, conditioning for them is not a matter of center conditioning, but the variables of the many ways in which they can be conditioned between the splits themselves. And unlike the triple split definition, the quadruple split is much more similar in the way in which psychologically they deal with their splits, as is the simple split definition. In other words, for the quadruple split, invariably, if not all of the aspects of their definition can be brought together by simple activations of a single gate. In other words, the fact that it is a single gate that brings the bridging for various aspects of their split aligns them to this very complex dilemma of seeing that there's something missing in them. Something missing in them. And the way in which they connect to others is very different. It's very different because they do not connect in what is the way in which most of us feel the strength of connection. That is, we feel the strength of connection through centers. You know, if you have an undefined emotional system and you meet somebody who has a defined emotional system, you feel them quite profoundly. And the same is true, in fact, for any center that you don't have that the other has, or a center that you have that they don't have. And it is the way in which most of us are most obviously aware of both the connection to the other and the conditioning element that the other brings. But when you're dealing with quads, what you're dealing with is that most of the centers do not respond to that. In fact, there could only be one that is potentially open, and as I said, in many cases there are no open centers. So everything about the conditioning ends up being locked into gate conditioning, and gate conditioning works very differently. This has to do with the nature of definition, where we began at the beginning of the week, in talking about how gate A and gate B, added together do not make a channel. But gate A and gate B juxtaposed result in a quantum leap, something that's larger, the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And so the way in which quads connect to the other is very much through this process of finding definition, and in finding definition, not clearly being themselves in that. It means the way in which connection works for them, that there is less of a hold to that. It is difficult for quadruple splits, and obviously the vast majority are not self, to be able to have reliable and consistent relationships with the other. As a matter of fact, it will be very much a question of their profile as to how they're going to deal with the other. Because in fact, they don't meet in the same way. And they don't offer the same opening to the other that they bring as a conditioning force. In other words, so often in their relationships, there is this sense of one-sidedness. The subtlety of the transformation through definition is not the same as being impacted by somebody's centers. Somebody who is a quad, obviously, the moment that you meet them, you're going to deal with very powerful center conditioning forces. It will take many, many years of research in order to build up the numbers, in order to truly be able to investigate this very unusual configuration.